The A to Z of woke society. In this piece, we're going to go on an alphabetic journey across woke society. Consider this your non-woke dictionary of wokeism, where we examine its key concepts and ideas and expose their true meaning. If you're easily offended, it's best to leave now. Otherwise, let's get into it. A. Allyship. When a self-hating, woefully naive, or highly egotistical white person seeks acceptance, validation, or attention by claiming to care about the plight of this or that supposedly oppressed group. Activist. A social sciences graduate who is unemployed or who works in academia or the non-profit sector and spends their waking hours spreading woke ideology in their particular sphere. In other words, adding zero value to society but subtracting much from it. Affirmative action. Giving someone a job or opportunity they are ill-qualified or suited for because they happen to have an in-vogue skin colour or gender, etc. A great way for organisations to lower their productivity, deliver inferior results, and create internal disharmony. Antifa. A group that opposes fascism, which they characterise as dangerous and violent. They oppose it by committing acts of terrorism, murder, arson, destruction of property, assault, and intimidation. Acting white means not acting low IQ or like a criminal. B. BLM. An organisation that preaches race communism, that ignores the true causes of black people's problems today, that isn't aware that those most guilty of thinking black lives don't matter are blacks themselves, and that was set up to enrich its hypocritical and corrupt founders. Body positivity. This is about very fat or obese people giving themselves a pat on the back for their stellar eating habits and championship-level commitment to avoiding exercise. Excluded from the body positivity movement are those who possess self-discipline, self-respect, and who value their health. BIPOC stands for Black, Indigenous, and People of Colour. These are saints and a higher order of beings who walk amongst us pale-looking mortals. Birthing people. Men can have babies too, don't you know? Bias. Something only white people are capable of, in particular, white men. And bias in no way is shaped by hundreds or even thousands of years of collective experience and observation. C. Cancel culture. The next best thing to labour camps and execution. It means ruining someone's reputation, cutting them off from their sources of income, and if possible, driving them to emotional and psychological despair. Thankfully, however, once the woke attain absolute power, they won't have to waste their time on the next best thing. Cisgender. A strange, alien-type creature. That is, someone whose gender identity corresponds to their sex at birth. Born a male, still a male. Alien. Cultural appropriation. A great evil perpetrated by white people when they like and therefore adopt and popularise something from a different culture. Can we include technology here too? We'll give back the dreadlocks and you stop using cars, electricity and toilet paper. COVID. A likely man-made virus with a less than 1% fatality rate, and that's probably overestimating it, which disproportionately killed the seriously ill and the very unhealthy. COVID provided a golden opportunity for governments around the world to test the limits of their power. They were very happy with the results of this test. It also enabled pharmaceutical companies to profit immensely from an incredible new market opening up. Climate change. The latest in a series of secular doomsday cults, which even if it does pose some kind of threat to us in the long run, is best solved through technology and innovation, not through activism and drama. Critical race theory. The theory that all white people are evil and racist, and that disputing this is evil and racist. Conspiracy theory. A theory or prediction that on the surface sounds ridiculous or crazy, and that is attacked or dismissed as such by the establishment, but that has a 95% chance of being proved true in the near future. D. Dead naming. Calling a mentally ill person by their birth name, rather than the new name that their gender delusions have led them to adopt. Drag queen. A man who wears a dress, wig, and makeup that makes him look like a cheap, ugly, scary-looking, big-boned street prostitute. In recent times, they've taken a keen interest in reading books to other people's young children. Curious. Diversity. The current mantra of Western governments, the media, corporates, non-profits, the entertainment industry, universities, and basically every lever of power and influence in our society. It means that ethnicity and nationhood are over, for Westerners that is, but that it's valid, precious, and eternal for all the non-Westerners who are slowly colonising the West, by the invitation or indifference of Western governments, of course. Disinformation. This is the modus operandi of our political, economic, and cultural establishment. It's the organised and deliberate spreading of falsehoods to the masses. E. ESG is an acronym for environmental, social, and corporate governance. It is giant investment funds leveraging their sizable shareholdings in most large companies in order to apply pressure on said companies to comply with the woke agenda. There's money to be made, after all, in going which way the ideological wind blows. Equality. Apparently, any inequality in life and society is due to oppression and injustice. So I guess that explains why there aren't any Bangladeshi men playing in the NBA or Bolivian women running investment banks in America. Well, maybe not, because inequality only gets noticed when it's native Westerners who are doing well in a particular area. If it's another ethnicity doing well, then inequality is perfectly normal and acceptable. F. Fat phobia. Someone afflicted by a horrible condition that makes them see fat and obese people as ugly, lazy, and unhealthy. Feminist. In the 21st century, it refers to a woman who hates herself, men, and society, but loves cats and vibrators. G. Globalists. Frenemies of the woke. They're using the woke, and the woke are using them to advance their respective agendas. Destined to end badly for both of them, but not before they make things a lot worse for us. Gaslighting. This is what the entirety of wokeism is built upon. They insist on the most ludicrous, evil, and insane things being true, and then try to make you question your sanity, sense, and grasp of reality if you disagree with them. Gender identity. A concept invented and spread by mentally and morally deranged Western academics. That anyone has the luxury to focus on something as phony, pointless, and depraved as this is only because we're living off the wealth and order we inherited from our non-woke ancestors. Once we're done squandering our inheritance and reality hits us in the face, gender identity will vanish overnight. H. Hate speech. Is any speech, written or spoken, that criticizes or offends a group favored by the political, cultural, and academic ruling classes. That it's true and justified is irrelevant. A more accurate term for it is wrong speech. Her story. A good example of a solution to a non-existent problem. It's telling history from a feminist perspective. So less emphasis on facts and more emphasis on grievance and wokery. Homophobia. It used to be that if you said or did something that gays, or their allies, found offensive, you were a bigot worthy of medieval punishment. Today, however, boring gays and lesbians have been usurped by the trans, non-binary and queer crowd in the pecking order of life, and offending them is the new crime against humanity. Will the gays reclaim their spot? Is there a LGBT plus civil war brewing? I. Intersectionality. This means the cross-section of different aspects of identity. For example, you're not just a woman, you're a black, obese, lesbian, disabled, atheist woman, and are therefore oppressed. Intersectionality is designed to divide, alienate, and corrupt people so that they cannot engage with each other in a healthy or productive way. They are forced to see every interaction through the lens of oppression and injustice, thereby encouraging a feeling of hatred and hostility toward their fellow man. Anyone who uses this term in earnest has identified themselves as an enemy of our civilization and species. Inclusion. This means the exact opposite. It means excluding anyone who is, through their words, deeds, or even just existence, deemed by the woke to be an evil, privileged, and bigoted oppressor. As a straight white male, there is no inclusion for me then. Oh well. Institutional racism. Today, it's a fancy way to shift responsibility onto society for certain racial or ethnic groups' failure to get ahead. It's not the group in question's fault that they lag other groups, but the fault of society and its institutions. What its proponents are actually seeking to create here, if they've not done so already, is institutional victimhood. Identity politics. This is basically intersectionality and victimhood applied to politics. What good, after all, are ideas if you can't apply them in the real world? It is interesting that whilst the woke are intellectually detached from reality, they are surprisingly adept at manipulating and controlling it. J. Journalists. Enemies of humanity, many of them. Purveyors of lies and propaganda. Arrogant know-it-alls. I can't say enough bad things about them. K. Kinks. The kind of thing the new breed of woke primary and secondary school teachers in America enjoy discussing with their students. Makes perfect sense for a 30-year-old genderqueer to be promoting LGBTQ plus fetishes to 11-year-olds. Your kids are in good hands. L. Latinx. This term was invented and promulgated by woke academics and activists. Its purpose is to remove the gender binary from the Spanish language. For example, instead of saying Latino in reference to men, or Latina in reference to women, because that's discriminatory against non-binary people, you say Latinx. The term has been so successful that a poll showed 2% of US residents of Latin descent use it. LGBTQ+. In the name of the lesbian, the gay, the bisexual, and the trans. Amen. Queer. Praise be to our alphabet heroes, who since they emerged from the closet have proven such a net positive for our society, contributing so much goodness, bettering our culture and our values, and helping put our society on firm footing for the future. I just can't say enough good things about them. Long march through the institutions. When the communist revolution failed to materialize in the West in the 20th century, as it had done in the East, Western communists, mainly academics, pivoted to cultural communism, which we today call wokeism. They also changed their strategy for attaining power, from pursuing violent revolution to instead capturing the institutions of the West, including the universities, schools, the media, courts, the arts, government, and more. Well, It's the 2020s now, and we can see their strategy worked. Kudos to them, and shame on us. Lived experience. It's an indirect way of saying that the experiences, knowledge, and perspectives of self-appointed victims of oppression, like woke, black, fat, or queer people, etc., count more than those of their supposed oppressors, who are usually straight white people. In other words, it's we're right, you're wrong. We're good, you're bad. So shut up and listen to what we have to say. M. Multiculturalism. We've seen how well people in a multicultural world get along. Now, let's replicate it within our individual nations. Muslim Arabs living side by side with Orthodox and secular Jews. Pakistani Muslims living side by side with Indian Hindus. African Muslims living side by side with African Christians. Western Christians and atheists living side by side with Arab, African, and Asian Muslims. Western LGBT supremacists living side by side with Muslim fundamentalists. Throw in hundreds of different ethnicities, native languages, and incompatible traditions and values, plus add some long-lasting enmity and grievances, add the woke poison, and I'm sure it will all work out fine in the long run. How could it not? Mansplaining. This is designed to sour interactions between men and women. It may not be fashionable to say this in clown world, but men and women are different. So men will naturally speak to women differently than how they speak to men. And women will likewise speak to men differently than how they speak to women. In fact, if men spoke to women the way they often speak to other men, women would likely be offended or horrified. It's also true that men can relate more to other men and women more to other women, so each may feel more comfortable conversing with their own sex, and this will affect their communication style too. Lastly, if mansplaining is characterized as patronizing speech, well, you can rest assured both males and females are capable of being patronizing both to members of their own sex and those of the opposite sex. It's universal and runs both ways. And that's my mansplaination to you, my 98% male audience. Misinformation means any facts or views that question or counter the false narratives that the media and government feed you are false. Microaggressions are a way to police people's speech and actions, because even the most trivial things you say or do can be subjectively interpreted as a racist, homophobic, sexist, or other attack by a professional victim, whose feelings might be hurt or mental health temporarily shattered as a result. This concept is a good example of why the woke's biggest problem with society is that it's occupied by humans, whom they fail to understand and despise. Minor attracted person. This is an emerging frontier for the woke. First, they're going to try to destigmatize pedophilia. Then they'll try to normalize it. You may think this is far-fetched, but if they're willing to indoctrinate young children in deviant sexual ideology, willing to drug them and mutilate them to, in inverted commas, fix their gender, and if you see the pitiful sentences that pedophiles receive from our woke justice system, then it seems more plausible. Add to that the early pioneers of what we today call wokeism were in fact proven minor attracted persons, as they call them. For example, the psychologist John Money, who coined the terms gender role and sexual orientation and popularized the term gender identity, sexually abused 2 young boys, both of whom committed suicide as adults. Harry Hay, who is described as the founder of the modern gay movement and the father of gay liberation, was an active supporter of the North American Man-Boy Love Association, a pedophile advocacy organization. Simone de Beauvoir, who wrote a foundational work on feminism, which paved the way for second-wave feminism, was suspended from her teaching position for seducing a 17-year-old pupil, and she later signed a petition seeking to completely remove the age of consent in France. These people are evil, and there's only one way to deal with pedophiles: capital punishment, preferably by hanging. Misgendering. This concept is a power play. If you can get someone to use your nonsensical pronouns, which relate to your made-up gender, because they're afraid to commit an imaginary crime, i.e. misgendering you, then you've asserted yourself as the one with the power and status in the relationship or interaction. N. Non-binary. This is for people who hate that there are only two sexes, male and female. So what do? Well, they invent their own gender, or have multiple genders, or have no gender, or have a fluctuating gender. They also have various sexual orientations. Fashionable indeed. Beware if you're dating one though, as things may be swell whilst they're a genderless pansexual, but sour once they become a neurogender lesbian. Nazi. What the woke call anyone who rejects their ideology. It seems Nazism is alive and well then. 1984. Whilst this book was supposed to be a warning, the woke have adopted it as an instruction manual. So we get a real-life book adaptation, guys. Will the adaptation be as good as the original? Let me know what you think. Comment below. O. Oppression. Here we reach the apex of wokeism's philosophy. For what it all boils down to is that Western man and the civilization they created have been the greatest force of evil and oppression the earth has ever known. Our very existence is an act of oppression. And I've no doubt if we all disappeared tomorrow, we'd still be blamed for oppressing society from beyond the grave. So that's what we're dealing with. See if you can find common ground for civil debate there, and call me when you do. P. Pronouns. Despite English being an established language with rules and conventions governing its grammar, the woke feel they have a right to upend it to suit their private whims. If you're so fragile and ill-fitted to society that you're compelled to change the language that billions of people use, then you're the problem, not them. Privilege. Usually this means white privilege. And this in turn means that white people have unseen advantages in society that help them get ahead. Firstly, this is the language of losers and failures who blame everyone else for their problems. Secondly, it's also a completely meaningless concept. For example, let's look at China. If Chinese people get ahead in life, if they succeed, if they occupy positions of power and influence in their society, if they become senior leaders in the Chinese Communist Party, then by the logic of the woke, they would have Chinese privilege. Perhaps as far as the woke are concerned, Somalians and Syrians should hold positions of power in China. Perhaps China should adjust their culture and society for them. As for Western countries, in case the woke hadn't noticed, they have been, and mostly still are, white majority countries, with a culture created by and for those people. Who do you think society is going to be geared towards? Who do you think will have the advantage? If I move to China and try to work my way up the ranks of the Chinese Communist Party, I will be at a disadvantage. It's just the way it goes. Having said that, if we look at Indians who migrate to Western countries, they don't whine about white privilege. They work hard, make sacrifices, and get ahead. Many become doctors, lawyers, accountants, and the list goes on. Indeed, the CEOs of many major tech companies are Indian, for example of Google and Microsoft, as well as the incoming CEO of YouTube. Therefore, any racial or ethnic groups in the West who insist on being eternal victims of white privilege, despite today getting every leg up possible, have no excuses. Their failures are their own. Plant-based. Have you seen the list of ingredients on plant-based foods? These are highly processed, artificial foods. They're the opposite of what we should be eating. The world doesn't need any more unhealthy soy boys. Soy sauce is alright. Peaceful protests. A mild and misleading name for violent riots. Expect assaults, arson, looting, destruction of public and private property, and more. Patriarchy. Woke women are angry at their fathers and at God, so demolishing the patriarchy seems like the perfect way to get back at them. Of course, you can't demolish the patriarchy. You can maybe weaken or subdue it for a time, but it will just bounce back again. The only question is what kind of patriarchy you want. Do you want a third world strongman one? Do you want one where warlords and criminals reign supreme? Do you want a really restrictive one where women can't leave the house without a male relative accompanying them? Do you want a just and orderly one? The irony of woke women trying to get rid of the patriarchy and going about it in the way they are is that they are creating the conditions for the patriarchy of their nightmares to arise. Q. Queer is used to describe a broad spectrum of non-normative sexual or gender identities and politics. In other words, blah 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 blah. So proud to have these people spreading their unique wisdom throughout society. R. Racist. The boogeyman word is here. Heaven forbid someone calls you a racist. I used to be under the spell of this word, indoctrinated as I was to believe that being called one was the worst thing imaginable. A social and spiritual death sentence. Racists, after all, were the lowest of the low, and there was no way I wanted to be associated with their views, which were wretched and backward. I, enlightened as I was, believed everyone was the same and equal. Now, I couldn't care less if someone calls me this. We're not a blank slate. Our genes determine up to 50% of who we are. The rest is environment, and that environment is not just family, but culture and beliefs, and these vary drastically throughout the world. It's become apparent to me that forcing people that are genetically and culturally very different to live together in the same communities and under the same laws and government is just more hassle than it's worth. The payoff, I don't think, will be there in the long run, and the costs will greatly exceed the benefits, and this is happening already. I think this view is regarded as common sense in many non-Western countries around the world, and I believe in the future, as we reap what we've sown in the West, it will become the default view here too. All this is not to say one can't like or respect other peoples and cultures. One can. It's fascinating to learn about and experience the wide variety of customs, traditions, beliefs, modes of living, architecture, art, food, etc. of peoples all around the world. We are fortunate to be able to travel and explore our diverse and multicultural planet, and to do so in a spirit of friendship. That doesn't mean, however, that our countries should be diverse and multicultural. In the long run, this is likely to lead to internal conflict, made worse by the woke, or, if the globalists have their way, to a soulless, homogeneous, androgynous society that worships at the altar of vapid consumerism. Race and ethnicity may become redundant, but so too will any meaning or purpose. S. Soy. Besides men trying to be women, there is nothing that more exemplifies our feminine and gay age than soy. We do not have values of duty, honour, sacrifice, resilience, or integrity today, but rather soy values. Our institutions are soy, our culture is soy, our leaders are soy, and whilst some people call what we're living in today clown world, you could just as easily call it soy world. Soy values lead to weak and dismal societies that self-destruct. Safe space. In a woke context, this is a designated space which is free of ideas, conversations, or actions that could be interpreted by the woke as offensive or hateful. In reality, it's just a tool the woke use to arbitrarily shut down people who disagree with their insane and evil views. Doesn't it feel like our whole society is slowly becoming a safe space? Science. We've all been told to trust the science. But what people who say this really mean is trust the scientists. We must remember that science is a method for acquiring knowledge that relies on observation and experimentation. Science is not scientists, least of all scientists who have been corrupted by the pursuit of money, power, and status. Nor is science scientists who have been coerced into staying silent or into backing a position for fear of jeopardizing their careers, ruining their reputations, and losing their funding. Science exists with or without scientists with PhDs and peer-reviewed articles. You and I can engage in the scientific method in our backyards. A 6-year-old can partake in science. What we have today in many scientific fields, excluding perhaps physics and astronomy, is politics, ideology, and profit-seeking masquerading as science. It might soon be time for a scientific reformation. Martin Luther of science, step forward. Social justice. This is just a fancy term for the combined basket of socialism, affirmative action, and the politics of blame and envy. Socialism. The woke may be cultural communists, but they haven't forgotten about economics. It's just that capturing the culture and institutions of the West has proven so successful for them that it's what most people notice. When it comes to economics, there is also a slight hurdle in that their frenemies in crime, the globalists, happen to have a different view on things. That's not to worry, however, as the woke have been hard at work on influencing and capturing corporations too, via HR and hiring departments, diversity, equity and inclusion teams, corporate social responsibility initiatives, partnerships with woke non-profits and charities, environmental social governance, aka ESG investing, by using the threat of boycotts or bad publicity, and in a broader sense, by indoctrinating future corporate employees via the education and university systems. So what emerges from all this could be a capitalist, communist Frankenstein. Sounds like fun. T. Toxic masculinity. This just means that all men are toxic. That is, all men who aren't LGBTQ+ or soy boys. And that is the ultimate destination the woke have in mind for us. That we become gay, queer, trans or non-binary, or that we become woke soy boys. They'll be merciful though, and we'll be able to keep our video games, porn and smartphones, plus an unlimited supply of antidepressants. In reality though, this means the collapse of civilization. And as I mentioned previously, all this insanity is just paving the way for the exact opposite kind of man to arise. Whether they arise before the collapse, pulling us back from the brink, or after it to rebuild society, one thing they most definitely will not be is woke. Triggered. This is like safe space, except it has no geographical boundaries. You could trigger a professional victim or woke activist anywhere in the physical or digital world by saying or doing something they deem hateful or offensive. An example of this is misgendering a creepy man who insists he's a woman. There are, of course, valid instances of triggering, where a person who has suffered serious abuse or has fought in a war may be set off by a particular noise, smell, or word, and may have little or no control over their reaction. But in the woke context, triggering is just A. Weak and deranged people trying to feel a sense of importance and uniqueness because they're so victimized and vulnerable, and B is a way for them to get anyone they disagree with or simply dislike to shut up. Transgender. As of 2023, transgenders sit at the top of the cultural pyramid, even above black people. Straight white men, by contrast, sit at the bottom. So, if you want high cultural status, you know what you need to do, guys. You'll become untouchable. Presidents, corporations, celebrities, academics, tech giants, basically the who's who will be on your side. Today, we don't celebrate men who display traits of honor and valor, but men who put on a dress and makeup. If this isn't the surest sign that our civilization is in severe decline, and that the ruling cultural, political, and economic minority need to be replaced, then I guess 2 + 2 = 5. Transitioning. This is how a transgender formally comes to be. There's broadly 2 types of transitions. One is social, where a person will decide to identify as a different gender and accordingly change the way they look, dress, and act. They will also change their name and pronouns and expect people to refer to them by their new gender. The second kind of transition is a medical one. This is where a person will receive hormone therapy, take puberty blockers, and/or have top surgery to remove or add breasts, and bottom surgery to remove existing genitals and reconstruct new ones. Social transitions can begin as early as age 3, and medical transitions as early as age 13. So, what this amounts to in cases where the person is 17 or under is child abuse. Abuse that is state-sanctioned, medically authorized and carried out, and parentally encouraged. If you're watching or listening to this, I don't think I need to convince you why it's child abuse. So all I need to repeat again is capital punishment, preferably by hanging. Tolerance. The woke have well and truly planted their flag on the concept of tolerance. In their minds, wokeism is synonymous with tolerance, and vice versa. This means that anything or anyone not woke is, by default, intolerant. So there really is no way to win here. Having said that, if we look at tolerance without its woke connotations, we have become so pathologically tolerant as a society that we put up with all manner of evil and depravity because we're afraid to come across as judgmental or close-minded. In retrospect, then, tolerance may thus have been the most effective Trojan horse deployed against us by the woke and their forebears, for it has rendered us incapable of fighting against, or in many cases even recognizing, evil. Maybe it's time for intolerance to make a comeback. Unconscious bias. This is what all white people are afflicted with. It's in our DNA, impossible to remove. Every non-white human on Earth, either alive today or in the past, has never had this. It's definitely not part of the everyday and overarching human condition to be biased. And it's certainly not a useful shortcut at times to help us navigate life. The truth is that anyone who goes on about unconscious bias is doing so because they are biased in favour of one group over another. Or they're just looking to earn brownie points or make a heap of money as a corporate diversity consultant. Virtue signal. The woke can convey both their loyalty to the group or cause and their moral superiority versus the rest of society by virtue signalling. This involves publicly proclaiming their woke-approved views and opinions in a pretentious manner. All they're actually signalling, however, is how woefully insecure, highly egotistical, and largely self-serving they are. You'll also notice that virtue signals sound remarkably like something a parrot would recite from rote memory, i.e. they were fed the line somewhere and are now repeating it for social clout. Victim. You can't have wokeism without victims. It's the oxygen it needs to survive. So, to ensure their ideology stays relevant and also grows, the woke have created and continue to create victim categories. They also encourage groups who have some kind of historical grievance to embrace victimhood as a strategy for getting ahead in society. Of course, every victim needs a victimizer, and the woke have adroitly crowned Western men, and to a lesser extent Western women, as the victimizers. And since many Westerners today feel guilty about theirs and their civilization's success, and also like to think of themselves as good and conscientious people, they play along with it, or just turn a blind eye. Those who don't are labelled Nazis, white supremacists, fascists, far-right, etc. So we are truly living in the golden age of victimhood. Screw self-empowerment and personal responsibility. W. White supremacy. Like white privilege, this is another meaningless term. If you're going to refer to white people as white supremacists, you may as well refer to the Chinese as Chinese supremacists, to the Japanese as Japanese supremacists, and to the Saudi Arabians as Saudi Arabian or Arab supremacists. Heck, even the woke can get their own version. How about death supremacists? That sounds fitting. X. Xi. If I ever become transgender, I think I'm going to go with this pronoun. Xi. Subscribe to Xi's channel. Remember to like Xi's video. Y. Youth. This is who the woke are ruthlessly and relentlessly going after. They're indoctrinating the young with their evil ideology because they're the ones most susceptible to swallowing their lies without question. It's both sinister and tragic that so many young lives are being ruined by wokeism. For many, won't find a way out once their heads and hearts have been corrupted by it. All you need to know about the woke is encapsulated in this: in their corruption of innocence, their betrayal of young people's trust, and in their desire to win at all costs, even if it destroys the next generation and society along with it. Z. Zombie. What any follower of woke ideology eventually becomes. And that's the A to Z of woke society. Now, for the most important question: who's going to step up and fix this mess?